But George, will you just please publicly apologize to Ben Roethlisberger? Just because I've got to go back in there. Every time I go in there, he's like mad. He won't answer my questions. And I go, it's George. I'll give you his number. Just say something good about Ben so we can go talk fantasy football.
Okay. I'm going to say something nice about Ben Roethlisberger. And I'll preface it by saying this. No one is a bigger fan of body transformation, of improving your health more than me. So I'm just proud of Ben Roethlisberger. He could have easily gone the other way. He could have said, screw it. I'm going to eat my way out of this. He's working in that direction. I applaud that. You know what I did? I saw that, Chris. I put a bet down on him to win MVP this year at like 80-1.
There you go. There. Welcome into the Cris Collinsworth podcast. Today is going to be the fantasy football preview show. I have our two PFF senior fantasy analysts, Ian Hartitz and Dwain McFarland. They're unbelievable. Wait till you hear these guys talking about fantasy and drafting and strategy and the whole thing. We also did a new kind of fantasy league that we're calling Worst Ball, which you'd think I'd be really good at this one. And actually, I did screw it up, so I probably am good at it. But we're going to talk about all of that with our good friend and senior pessimist, George Chahrouri, who makes everybody in Pittsburgh crazy. But in fact, if you want to play along with us with this new Worst Ball fantasy league, and I mean, it was fun. We had a lot of laughs doing this. Just listen to the podcast and then check it out and join in on the fun. It'll be all part of the PFF site. You'll be able to get access to that there as well. But if you're a little bit more of the traditional kind of fantasy drafter, then if you go to PFF and you use promo code KICKOFF30, you're going to get 30% off any PFF subscription. And of course, that gets you PFF's fantasy football draft kit and draft strategy rankings, tiers, and projections, PFF's weekly rankings and projections by all of our analysts, and of course, the PFF algorithms, which I personally wrote, and all of PFF's premium locked article content from PFF's awesome analysts and PFF's betting dashboards with every NFL and college game. And believe me, where we have the biggest advantage, I think, is in college football because our guys know more about it than anybody. We are analyzing every player on every snap and every game. So trust me, we know more than anybody. And PFF's props tools, and coming soon, our best bets tool as well. Again, all that promo code KICKOFF30 for 30% off any PFF subscription. Get access to all of PFF's fantasy tools for just $6.99. That's crazy. Okay, let's get to our fantasy guys. Ian Hartitz, Dwain McFarland, and George Chahrouri. All right, well, welcome into the Cris Collinsworth podcast, and this is the week that we are going to introduce the world to a brand new way of playing fantasy football. Now, this is right up the alley of Pro Football Focus here. I've just got to tell you, this one fits our room better than anybody. We were playing Worst Ball Fantasy with our fantasy experts out there. We got Ian Hartitz right here in our room. Ian, good to see you.
Good to see you.
And Dwain McFarland, who is away. Where are you? Dwain, where are you?
Texas, just south of Fort Worth.
Oh, nice and cool down there, is it? You feel good?
Very, very cool. Very cool.
What were the bugs you were talking about? You have new bugs in Texas now?
Yeah, we've got these things called army worms. I've never heard of them, but they've eaten about a quarter of my yard in 2 days. So that's awesome. So I got to figure that out, Chris.
Army worms. Okay. Those are the things that hit my desk daily, thanks to George Chahrouri, who's in charge of everything down at the bottom down there. Now, George, where are you? Ever since I gave you that big raise, I haven't seen you. So where are you, in the Bahamas? Are you in Hawaii? Where are you spending that money?
Yeah, I'm in California right now. I was in Canada. I've been all over, just been spending the money on my future fantasy winnings all over the place. And there's probably, like, for the people that know me, and you obviously know me, there's no better fantasy format for me than Worst Ball, right? It's basically like if George created a fantasy league, this would be it.
So my friend Jonathan introduced the concept. So we decided we were going to play this thing the other night. And we had a list of players that you could pick from, right? And so it's not insulting to be in our game, but basically you want Patrick Mahomes last. You do not want Patrick Mahomes on your team. You're trying to watch your opponent score touchdowns and score points. Is that basically it, Ian?
Yeah, for those that I think most people are familiar with a general fantasy draft, but best ball, what that has been is you just draft and that's it. Your whole roster gets optimized, best score goes to the top. Our version of worst ball is we're looking for the opposite of that. We want to have the worst total score possible in that lineup. But like you said, Chris, we didn't make it so you could just draft guys that are going to be off the team, out of the NFL completely here in a month. Starters, guys that, we're like in the top 60 of our rankings still, running back, wide receiver. Guys that are usually going in a draft, but we're forcing people to take them in the first round instead of the 18th. Or as we saw with your team, maybe not in certain cases.
There you go. But I mean, it was perfect for us. So let me give you how my days typically go. So I've got about 5 minutes before the fantasy draft is going to start. So I'm trying to log on to our site, right? And get on there. And so, of course, it's not going to work. So now my guy, Michael Ayers, comes flying in the room and he does the thing. But one thing it wants is you've got to, in Ohio or something, you've got to download a certain number of players. I don't know, some crazy rule. So we do all that. So now the whole point of this worst ball is that you're supposed to draft the worst players on this list out of everybody on there. So we go, I'm pick number 3. I'm like, this is going to be golden. I'm going to go flying right through there. But because we downloaded some of these players, my first 2 picks are Christian McCaffrey and Devontae Adams. There is universal laughter going on all over the fantasy world, and our guys who I've paid to be the experts are laughing their ass off via social media about me picking 2 of the best players and the whole thing. I'm like, Ayers, I'm screaming at him. I'm like, come on, you're killing me here with this thing. So I've got 2 of the premier guys that everybody was trying to avoid at the top of my draft. That was good.
It's just funny seeing the draft board where number 1, Cordero Patterson, number 2, Justin Jackson. And there comes Christian McCaffrey right after.
Why not? And then, so here's my question about this. So if one of these guys get hurt, God forbid, let's say Christian McCaffrey gets hurt again, do I play him? Is that how it works, or does he go off the list and I have to get somebody else?
We were chatting about this in our just kind of Slack chat. This one kind of issue with the league, you're incentivized to root for injuries more or less, because if McCaffrey gets hurt, you're getting a 0 for him the entire year, which again is the goal. So we took out guys, like Cam Akers that are already injured, but theoretically, if you really want to go all in on this league, whopping $5 buy-in that we had, you would be, rooting for injuries.
This is a sick place to work. I will say that right now. I will say. So who won? So give me the rundown of who did we think crushed this thing, Dwain? Who do we think, just kind of other than me, who screwed it up?
Yeah. Well, if you look at underdogs and if you look at the projections, I'm projected lowest, right, George? So I think I won, Chris. But I will say Nathan Yonke's already off to a really hot start today because he drafted Travis Etienne. So just like we were talking about, injuries play a role. He's also got Cole Beasley, who's now, been sent home with due to COVID. So we'll see. And we know Beasley's not wanting to be vaccinated. So maybe that's a potential strategy. You're drafting some of these guys that you haven't had vaccinations. But it's funny because it's like Ian said, it's the total opposite of what you would normally do. So normally you want talent and opportunity. Like if you've got big talent and big opportunity, those are your first picks. Then you kind of get into this range where it's like you either want really big opportunity, like say like a Mike Davis. You may not think the talent's elite, but he's going to have a lot of opportunity, or you want really high ceiling as far as talent goes. So maybe a guy like Jamar Chase you would draft. You're not for certain about his role, but he's going to be involved in the offense. You know that he's a young player, he's ascending. And then eventually, as the draft goes, you work your way down till you get to the bottom, and you want players with what you believe, to have less talent and less opportunity. So it really was weird to be taking those players early on. And so I have to say money to taking Wayne Gallman, a player that made this list that could never see a snap this season. When you look at a guy like Gio Bernard in the first round, he actually kind of scares me as a first round pick, because what if all of a sudden they start going, no huddle offense, 2-minute offense. We've seen Tom Brady do that in the past. And all of a sudden Gio Bernard is like this back catching all these passes. Well, that's going to be a lot of points. So for me, I took Rashad Penny first just because he struggled with injuries. The players I wanted were gone. Then I took Hunter Renfrow in the second because I don't see the Raiders running a ton of 11 personnel. They run more 12. And so this is a slot receiver. They've got other guys on the team. So I think it's weird to look at it, to be honest, Chris, like just to say, hey, here's the absolute winner, because there's a lot of really crappy teams, which I guess, besides yours, of course. And that was the goal.
You wait and see. Something will work out with those two guys. You wait and see. I'm going to be the upset winner here. And of course, George, I thought it was, Ian, a little stunning, really, that he did not take the entire Pittsburgh Steelers roster as he was drafting, because he cheers against them so hard. But I did see that as we got down to the receivers, it was bang, bang, bang for you, George, on Pittsburgh Steeler guys here.
Yeah, let me tell you this. I was absolutely heartbroken that Big Ben was not available for me. One of my strategies was going to be to get two quarterbacks. So we've talked about the strategy here a couple of times, but like the way, as you look at your roster, you go, okay, how few superstars can I have contributing to my team, right? I'm trying to score the fewest amount of points. So I want whole sets of positions that don't have a superstar. So when I was thinking about quarterbacks, I was like, I got to get Big Ben. I got to snag Big Ben. And then, Tua was the other guy that I was going after, and someone snagged Big Ben from me. So I ended up with Tua and Baker. And I was like, well, I got to make up for it somehow. So I have the entire Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiving core. I have Deontay Johnson, Juju, and Chase Claypool. I took them back to back to back, and they have a pretty stack. They've got some competition here because I have AJ Green, I have Randall Cobb, and so that's a formidable group there. I think honestly, Chris, like I thought I had a really good team. And Ian and Dwain, I think I was coming for the crown. But at the end of the draft, I'm sitting there and I have to pick a tight end. And it's between Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, and George Kittle. And I couldn't take George Kittle because I'm a Niners fan. I couldn't do that to myself. I was worried about Darren Waller getting every single pass thrown his way from Derek Carr. So I took Travis Kelce, and now I'm just the whole season I'm going to be rooting against Travis Kelce. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself.
Okay, you're going to come in last, so we've already established that. I've got one. Now, that's an interesting strategy here, and we're going to get on to real fantasy strategy here in a minute. But I took Jonnu Smith, right? Who knows what's going to happen with that? I was kind of figuring Cam before Cam doesn't show up for the COVID test, but I was figuring he was going to be the quarterback, maybe a little bit more run-oriented than what other people might expect. But I have no others because I was like George. By the end, I'm not taking one of those big three guys. So I'm riding with Jonnu Smith no matter what happens the whole year. So how do we like that strategy?
So again, maybe we didn't get every single rule across as it was supposed to be. Everyone was supposed to draft two tight ends. We had some people take three, so they weren't.
There were none left by the time I got there.
Well, exactly. I'm the one that really messed up here because I got the round 13.
So basically, we have no idea what we're doing in this league.
Well, George took Kelce, and all of a sudden I needed a tight end, and I just had to pick between Waller and Kittle. And in a usual fantasy draft, like those are the big three, and I'm used to trying to get one of them. If I don't, you wait till the end. You can't just wait till the end here when there's only a finite amount of players. Otherwise, you end up with nothing but studs to pick from. So that was one of the funnier kind of parts for me, and I can tell with George as well, where you feel really good about the team until you remember that tight end spot.
I can't wait to see how this comes out. I seriously cannot wait.
Let's because I think it'd be fun. I'd really like to see, other people try this out. We might try and do another one where we like kind of
actually know what we're talking about when we do it the next time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We'll get everyone aligned this time, and like maybe you won't draft the number one player in the league right off the bat, and Devontae Adams. You never know. But I think we have it in a pretty good spot. So what you want is a list of players that you can draft from. No one can draft anybody outside that list. We'll actually share it with you. If you email us, we'll share it with you. We'll post it in the description of the podcast. So go check out the podcast description. We'll post that in there where you can email us for it, and we'll send you the rules. So basically the rules are you can only draft from that pool. You have to draft a certain number of players at each position. So you can't pull a Chris. And then we take out all the injured players. So if there are any players that get injured between now and when you do your draft, take them out. But I got to be honest with you guys, and you guys have done more fantasy drafts than I have, but I've been doing fantasy for a while, and I've always been looking for a way to make it more exciting, like, super flex, auction leagues, keeper leagues, the whole deal. This was a really fun draft. I thought it was uniquely challenging, and just fun and exciting to do.
You know what's interesting is you really had to have some understanding of the entire league to do this, right? I mean, because now you're looking for, okay, you may have heard of these players, but now you've got to figure out, okay, are they running 2 tight ends this year? Are they running more 11 personnel? What are they going to do? Who's injured? COVID list now is important. Kirk Cousins probably was a high draft pick in this whole thing because of the uncertainty of all that. I agree with you, George. I thought it was an experts only, except for me, kind of decision-making sort of league. And we're going to take a little break and come back and talk real fantasy football here in a minute. That's my go-to when I walk in and Ben's giving me this look like, you think I'm going to answer your questions this week? No. I'm going to say, hey, my guy, 80-1, he took MVP. That's it. George, you're out of here. We're going to come back and talk fantasy football with the real experts. We're going to make you some money here after a very quick break. All right, we'll be right back to Fantasy Football Land and Ian and Dwain. But first, a little reminder that there is more preseason football this weekend. And if you listen to George and Eric on the PFF forecast, and why would you not, you know that you should be heading to the DraftKings Sportsbook app ASAP. The special this week is so easy. The NFL is back. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is giving all new players a can't-miss offer for week 1. Listen to this. Use promo code PFF when you deposit and then bet just $1 on any NFL game during the first week of the season, and you will receive $200 in free bets. $200 in free bets instantly, no matter what. Take advantage of this limited time offer right now thanks to PFF. That's the promo code. And you can head to DraftKings Sportsbook app right now to check out all the great promotions and daily odds boosts. Plus, you can make every game a big game with some big-time game parlays. Those are fun, too. All right, here we go. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app right now. Use promo code PFF to receive $200 in free bets when you place a $1 bet on any Week 1 game. That's promo code PFF to get free $200. That's amazing. And free bets right now. All right, let's get back to the boys. All right, here we go with the fantasy experts here. Now, this is something that I'm going to give a little history of PFF. When I bought the company basically in 2014, fantasy football was like in a tiny cupboard somewhere over there. And I said, I don't know, but a lot of people are playing fantasy football. We should try to do this. And the other thing I did was, what about college football? Let's do that. So those were my 2 and only contributions to PFF over the years. But fantasy football now has become one of the main engines of revenue for PFF. So I like it a lot. I really do. And so we hired Ian, and you've been a fantastic contributor here. And then Dwain comes on board, and we're fired up because we wanted to have some crossfire. You got to have some interaction here with this whole thing. So I like playing fantasy football, but one of the problems that I had was that if I had to adjust the lineups every week, I was never going to do that. So the best ball is sort of the answer to that, right? You pick in the beginning of the season, and that's it. You don't have to set the lineups every week.
You're done. You draft once and you're done. Because drafting is the most fun part of it.
No question.
Like. And even if you can't get together with the buddies and stuff, I mean, I have 10 drafts going on my phone right now that are slow drafts. So I just pretty much get a text message every few hours saying, hey, Ian, your time to draft, in this spot. So never stops. Best ball is great. Usual redraft, I'm sure, is what people are most used to. Draft your team in August. You change your rosters throughout the year, get a new team next year. The really fun one, though, Chris, is Dynasty, where you draft your startup team. And those those are your guys through thick and thin. That's a squad, and you got to look a little more long-term in the future. So
it's like a real organization. It's like the
Absolutely.
Bengals. If you draft them, you got them for a lifetime kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so when I start my first one and I draft O.J. Howard to be the next god at tight end a couple years ago, you feel pretty bad about that for more than just 1 year. So why do we do this to ourselves every year? I don't know, but I like to think it's fun.
So, Dwain, but it's amazing to me that people who really watch and study fantasy football, they know the league better than I do. I mean, I'm sitting there trying to keep up with you guys as far as the skill positions, the defensive guys, and the whole thing. And it really is a fantastic way to learn the league, isn't it?
Yeah, especially whenever, we've got the data that we have at Pro Football Focus, which is really what, the draw for me, coming to PFF was just, I'm a data and analytics guy, and there's no place that has better, data and analytics. So trying to figure out how to take those things and figure out what really matters and apply that to fantasy football. And so one thing I've really worked on, Cris, is this thing called the utilization report. And I've been doing it for a while, but now that I'm working, with PFF, I have access to so much more data. So for example, this last weekend, I was looking at the Cowboys. I'm from Dallas, so let's talk about the Cowboys a little bit. And I was a little worried about CeeDee Lamb, right? Because he's going in the third round of a lot of drafts right now. And if you're only on the field in 11 personnel as a slot receiver, you're only going to be out there about 70% of the time your quarterback drops back to pass on the season, which makes it kind of tough. You basically need to get a little bit lucky to be a top 12 receiver if that's going to be your role. Well, this last weekend, based on the data we have, I could see while the starters were in, obviously Dak didn't play, but while the rest of the starters were in, all three receivers being Gallup, Cooper, and then CeeDee Lamb, he was out there for 90% of the routes. In fact, he was the guy bumping Michael Gallup off of the field whenever they went to 12, so 2 tight ends, and they were only using 2 receivers, or they went with heavier sets. So now we see Lamb is never leaving the field, and this is a perfect example, right, of really where real football and then fantasy football meet. And it's due to these advanced, different data points that we have that you just really can't get anywhere else. So it's super exciting to get to try to bring those sort of things forward and help folks think about fantasy football in a different way. But to your point, you're truly having to study and dig deep into these things. And then ultimately you're learning about football, but it's also helping make you a better fantasy player. And so you naturally learn a lot of things along the way.
I tell you, one of the data points that I love from fantasy football, the first time I heard it was from fantasy football, were sort of red zone targets as a way of saying, all right, how many points is this guy likely to score? And it comes down to how many opportunities does he get in the red zone. But it really does, during the broadcast, you kind of get a feel for what they're going to end up doing. So the wide receiver DB matchups that you guys do, I mean, all of it is just really, really interesting for me. The other thing that I think that as I listen to your guys' shows, that I notice is there's a lot of counterintuitive sort of stuff that happens. For example, almost all of the quarterbacks that are in the upper tier of your guys' choices are all these running quarterbacks, right? So Patrick Mahomes, number one, and we get that, and he can move too, but Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott. And so when we were doing this draft the other night, and I was thinking, I don't know how much Dak is going to run this year. So I was starting to go, all right, I wonder if I could steal him a little bit later on. What are you guys thinking about with this quarterback position? Because it's quarterbacks, not necessarily who are the best throwers. Aaron Rodgers is in tier 3 for you, Dwain. But then it's running backs who really aren't the focal point in the running game, but the passing game that seems to make the difference with those guys there. So you have to think a little bit broader than just who are the best NFL players.
Right. As much as we want fantasy football to replicate real life football, it doesn't. You get a full fantasy point just for catching the ball. That little tap pass Jimmy G throws Debo counts the same as Julio Jones catching a ball 40 yards down the sideline in double coverage. We can do different leagues to help fix that. You can do half point per reception and things of that nature. But the two kind of cheat codes we've found in fantasy are the rushing quarterbacks and the receiving running backs. Occasional Robert Woods type receiver gets carries himself. But these players that have multiple facets and means of getting their production are the guys that we just see raising to the top. You mentioned Aaron Rodgers. Reigning MVP. I think you'd be hard pressed to name even just one other better quarterback than Rodgers last year, he was a fantasy QB4, as great as everything went for him. Derrick Henry ran for 2,000 yards. He was a fantasy RB3 because he just didn't catch enough passes. So it's a game we play, and if you want to win, you got to kind of buy into this. And again, just the rushing. We've only seen 22 instances of a quarterback having 100 rush attempts over the past decade. 15 of them finished as a top 8 fantasy QB. And even the exceptions are guys like, 2018 Lamar Jackson, 2011 Tebow, who when they were out there were actually still productive quarterbacks. So ultimately, it's a game of volume. That's what we're trying to chase more than anything. I say it all the time in the podcast. We don't hate any players. We hate their average draft position. So if someone is going as the RB5 that we think is the RB15, yeah, we're down on them. Obviously, we want every player to do well. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to project their opportunity. Players with, again, those 2 different measures to get the opportunity tend to stand out.
And so a guy like, let's take a player from last year, Larry Fitzgerald, who caught a bunch of quick screens, just wide receiver, raise up, you're not running routes, just flip him the ball. That has value.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any type of utilization, just like what, Ian's talking about, is what we're looking for. So, I mean, this year, a great example with the Cardinals is just what you're talking about, Chris. I mean, Rondell Moore, right out of the gate, they open up with a screen pass to him. So Deebo Samuel gets the same kind of looks. They're just as valuable as, what Ian said, a look 40 yards down the field in double coverage to DK Metcalf or some other receiver. So it's all about being used broadly is the other way I think about it. So there's breadth, and then there's depth. I want players that are moved all over the field. I want players at the top of the draft. You want players that can win deep, they can win underneath, they can win run after the catch. But then as you move down the draft board, you start getting into these spots in the drafts where you're really starting to take more specialized players. So if you look at running backs, for example, about 50% of their receiving points come on first and second down. Well, that means that if you don't play on third and fourth down, or long down and distance or passing situations, or if you don't get the 2-minute offense, you're immediately capped if you're in a league that gives points for reception. So you could be taking the back that gets the first and second down work, who technically is on the field more than the receiving back, but in a format where you get 1 point per reception, the back that's actually on the field less but gets those receptions can outscore the lead back from the team that gets more yards rushing. So, yeah, you're absolutely looking for how is the player utilized, and then you want to adjust to what is your league's format. You get a point per reception, you get a half point per reception, you get 0 point for receptions, because those things change the dynamic. If you don't get a point per reception, well, then you're not as worried about having backs that catch passes. So it absolutely matters.
Well, and perfect examples like Derrick Henry, who over 2,000 yards a season ago, is a second-tier running back for you, Dwain. I mean, it's, because he's not involved in the passing game to that extent. But McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, all at the top of that list because of the receiving. All right, there are going to be people out there saying, I don't give a crap about fantasy, talk a little football. So let's talk a little football here. And this fits right into fantasy as well. The quarterbacks now for some of these various teams, do we even feel good about the Bears, the Saints, the 49ers, the Broncos, where we don't even really know yet who the quarterback is going to be? Now, maybe Jameis last night changed a few hearts over there. I think we're going to see Garoppolo with the 49ers. I'm not positive about that. The Broncos still not announcing. So what do you do with all that?
So Broncos, I think in fantasy, the answer is just no. We haven't really seen Teddy or Drew Lock provide much upside regardless. Justin Fields or Trey Lance are where it gets interesting because they just fit that dual threat profile in terms of what we've seen from past successful rookie quarterbacks. What I've been preaching, though, throughout the offseason, because we don't know when they're going to be out there. We already got Dalton secured for week 1. It sounds like Jimmy G is at least the favorite at the moment. So if you find one of these guys on your team, draft Kirk Cousins. First 7 Vikings games, Bengals, Cardinals, Seahawks, Browns, Lions, Panthers, Cowboys. I know they're a run-first offense, but last year, only Aaron Rodgers had more games with at least 3 passing touchdowns than Kirk Cousins. I know he's maybe not everyone's favorite quarterback in the media lately with some of his off-the-field decisions. We just got to realize this Vikings offense, again, looks loaded. And a lot of these games, like the Seahawks, Cardinals, Cowboys, it's a mix of not just a bad defense, but also a high-scoring offense. We see those games sometimes where Dalvin gets 30 carries, Kirk throws the ball 15 15 times and it's over. I think he could avoid that. And then when you look at Fields and Lance's second half schedule, that's where we can maybe get that perfect marriage. So I know some people, they don't like to spend, they don't like to have two quarterbacks on their fantasy roster. And if you're taking Mahomes or Kyler, one of these guys at top, you don't have to. But if you take the rookie, get Kirk Cousins early, and I think you'll have yourself a QB1.
So you're waiting for the halfway point where one of the two of those guys are going to be playing, which is a pretty good bet. I mean, all along I've made the point that, okay, you start Garoppolo, hopefully jump out to, 5-1, 5-2 start, trade him, actually get some value back for him instead of getting nothing for him. And now you just run off because you're going to play Lance anyway. So just go ahead and do it at that point. But you're saying the schedule is really perfectly set up for him in the second half of the season.
Yeah, and I mean, I won't list the whole 49ers stretch. It ends with the Houston Texans in Championship Sunday, which is all you need to know. I'm just expecting, based on history, for these guys to be under center by that point. Since 2010, the only 4 quarterbacks drafted in the top 10 that didn't hit at least 10 starts were Tua, Jared Goff, Mahomes, and Jake Locker is the only guy that didn't even get out there for one play. So Fields, Lance, there's such different skill sets in the quarterback they already have anyway. What do you use to pick for if you're not going to start them eventually? It's nice that the schedule sets up the way it does too.
Dwain, what would you do with a guy like Carson Wentz? And I feel like we got conned a little bit by the Colts with the whole 5 to 12 week thing or whatever. But I'm watching video of him now out making cuts on that foot and breaking hard. And it sounds like Quentin Nelson might be coming back here as well. But Carson Wentz, would you just completely go, not feeling too good about that?
Well, you're looking at my sheet, so that's pretty much how I feel about Carson Wentz right now. When I look at the offense, I know they want to run the ball. So I think that's going to limit, his dropbacks. I'm not crazy about the receiving core. I mean, I like Michael Pittman. I think Paris Campbell actually has something to him if he could ever stay healthy. T.Y. Hilton is obviously, getting up there in age. They don't really have a go-to type tight end. So I just really see them wanting to lean into Jonathan Taylor and use him in the running game. Obviously, they've got to get Quentin Nelson back as well, but their defense is a solid defense. So when I look at Wentz and I just worry about his accuracy issues and the type of offense that they're wanting to run, for fantasy purposes, it's just not somebody that I'm looking at. Now, if you're in a situation where you're drafting in a league that starts 2 quarterbacks, which we call super flex, well, then he becomes a viable option that you're thinking about as your second or third quarterback on your roster. But if you're just in a 1 quarterback league, yeah, I'm passing on Wentz this year.
The one rookie we do know will be playing is Zach Wilson. And my thing coming out in the draft was this guy might be the best quarterback in this draft. You couldn't pick against Trevor Lawrence because of the history and all that he accomplished in championship games and all that sort of stuff. But the Aaron Rodgers lookalike from the film study I saw was Zach Wilson. Now, the question was, he had perfect protection at BYU, so was that going to translate? But so far, this sucker's been playing. Now, Green Bay played nobody in that game the other day, right? Nobody on that defense played, but Zach Wilson looked great.
I mean, we just saw finally a couple of those throws that we saw at BYU. We all knew he had this arm talent, but now we're seeing it against backup defenders, but still professional defenders. The throw to Sternberger where he went tight end down the seam, to lead him away from the safety in that small window was impressive. The one that I think is getting most of the views where he rolled to his left, came back right, showed that off-script ability. These are the plays we saw him making in college, and we just wondered if he could replicate it. Okay, it's preseason, but at least that answer is yes and not no at this level. We'll find out in the regular season if he can keep it going. At a minimum in fantasy land, I'm down to invest in this dude versus guys like Wentz, like Darnold, like Daniel Jones, guys that we have seen play against professional defenses and not turn out all that well. And the great thing about Wilson, again, going back to the idea, we don't hate players, we hate ADPs. He's one of the cheapest quarterbacks available. And not only is he cheap, Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, these guys are going outside the top 45 receivers right now. So you can go in your draft, get all your studs early that you want, and then make yourself a nice little jet stack at the end.
Yeah, jet stack. I love it when you guys use all those terms. Does it help All right. So some of the biggest statistics as a receiver that I had in my career, and also as a quarterback, I started as a quarterback, all came when we were getting our ass kicked, right? I mean, so we're way behind and we got to throw the ball every down. And I end up with 170 yards or whatever the case may be. I go, wasn't a bad day. We got beat. It wasn't a bad day. Do you sometimes look for the lesser teams knowing they're going to have to throw it coming from behind?
It certainly helps. And I mean, it's not, we don't want to target bad teams necessarily, but we
already talked about targeting injured players, so why not?
That's true. But we are just looking for that volume more than anything else. And when you see that discrepancy, a guy like Corey Davis, who, Dwain, you might have the specific stat, Nathan Yonke's been yelling it everywhere. He's gotten targeted on like 70% of his snaps this preseason. And for him to have the potential for 150 or so targets, it's just hard to bust at that rate. That's why we're in on Brandon Cooks. Even though the Houston Texans offense is looking like maybe the worst in the entire league, when you have someone that could get that many opportunities, it's just hard for them to bust.
So many of the classics. So Russell Wilson is a guy that is a runner and also never gets hurt. I'll knock on wood. It's more important for me for Sunday Night Football to have quality football than it is my fantasy team. So I'm going to knock on wood for him there. Dak Prescott, though. How do you see him, Dwain, now that coming off the foot, now he's got the arm, now he's got, where would you be? Is he still a top 5 guy for you?
Yeah, I still have him in the top 5, but obviously he's a guy that I'm hoping is going to slide a little bit before I take him. So a lot of it is about taking value, for quarterbacks, even though I have these, 5 guys in the top, I don't take any of them at their normal average draft position. All of them have to fall past where they are right now before I really take them. Because whenever you go look at the rest of the rankings and the way these players fall out, I'm pretty much going to be guiding you towards continuing to take running backs, receivers, and even potentially a couple of tight ends in that range. And whenever you do the overall rankings. But as far as Dak goes, I'm concerned right now. But typically, Chris, now this isn't for everyone, but I draft a lot of fantasy teams. So as news cycles come and go throughout the summer, I like to buy whenever player values get depressed, because as soon as we hear that Prescott is back to throwing full strength, his value is going to shoot back up the board. So you have these little mini periods throughout the summer where you may get a week or two where a player's value is depressed by a round and a half. And so I try to gain exposure to them, because I know as soon as the good news hits again, then they're going to shoot back up the board, and I'm going to be looking for another player that I'm going to be buying into. So with Prescott, though, if you're looking at those top 5, he's obviously the one with the most concerns now with the shoulder plus the foot, but plays in a great offense, got 3 great receivers. Hopefully the offensive line can stay healthy, this year. Tyron Smith struggled over the last couple of years, and that's been an issue for them. But it's just hard to see a scenario where if Dak is healthy, doesn't finish in the top 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at what that offense was able to do. He has room to fall, and he'll be fine in this landscape. If you just look at fantasy points per game, single season, I know, 5-game sample, only 2019 Lamar Jackson was better than 2020 Dak Prescott. Will he be, scoring all the rushing touchdowns, and he even had a receiving touchdown against the Giants last year again? Maybe they do take their foot off the gas a little bit, but it's kind of like the Josh Allen thing. Like, I don't expect as many runs inside the 10-yard line. He got 258 million reasons to avoid those, but how much can you really take that out of Dak? I mean, this guy's highlight film of just those third downs, that Seahawks wildcard game from a few years ago, diving head over heels. Like, I've never seen a quarterback kind of be more just clear-minded about putting his shoulder down. I don't think he can pull that out of Dak. So even if he's 95% of the Dak Prescott we saw last year, I still think that's a top 5 fantasy quarterback.
Let's finish up the conversation on quarterbacks with what's going on with Cam Newton now. He's going to miss this week of practice. He had a good game the other day. Mac Jones been playing very well also. Where do you think that stands for this season?
I think it's Mac Jones sooner rather than later, because why do you bring him in? Like, the Jimmy G, Mac Jones thing, if that would have hit, okay, that's 2 similar quarterbacks. Maybe you want Mac Jones to wait the whole year. When we go from Cam to Mac, I'm assuming that's going to be a fairly drastic offensive shift, so I'm not sure why you wouldn't just get that done sooner rather than later, particularly we got Cam back on the COVID list and with how well Mac Jones has been playing. Chris, overall PFF passing grade, when kept clean, under pressure, throwing past the sticks, Mac Jones has been number 1 among 45 qualified QBs in the preseason. I know, it's just a preseason, but it's all we got right now. and the guy's been doing a hell of a job with each and every opportunity.
Dwain, what says you about that one?
It's just a situation I'm overall avoiding, but I do agree with Ian. I think it goes to Mac Jones. I think, I read these camp reports pretty much every day, and they both seem to be having some inconsistency. Each one will have a good day, then the other one will have a bad day. One will have a good day, one will have a bad day. And I think in a scenario like that, you're typically going to lean to the younger quarterback. Now, I will say, what does that even mean? Knowing Bill Belichick, he'll still use Cam Newton inside the 5-yard line, and he'll drive everybody nuts. He'll say, okay, Mac Jones is my starting quarterback. He'll be out there. And then everybody will get excited about Damian Harris as a running back, knowing that Cam Newton's not there to still rushing touchdowns. But then guess what? They'll get inside the 5, and you'll see Cam Newton on the field. So it's just overall for me in fantasy football, it's a situation that I'm avoiding.
Agreed.
The tight end situation, the big three, Kelsey, Darren Waller, George Kittle, I think pretty universal, right? But the more tape, we're doing Atlanta's preseason game this weekend, and the more tape I watch on Kyle Pitts, the more I go, why can't he be Julio Jones in that offense? He's not limited to having to be outside. He's going to be inside. You got Matt Ryan, who's going to be comfortable trying to get completions, just move the sticks kind of things. But this guy also has that big play flair that this offense is going to really need without Julio now.
Dan Mullen said it at Florida. He's an elite wide receiver and an elite tight end. I'm not sure why Kyle Pitts' agent didn't say that my client is a wide receiver from day one. We look at the salary these guys demand, and, Greg Olsen brought up this point too. One play you're asked to do an offensive tackle's job, the next play a wide receivers, yet you're being paid less than both of them. So from that standpoint, it's disappointing because you're right. If they want to use him as the clear-cut number 2 pass game option, okay, he might not put up Julio-esque numbers in year 1, but you could at least fill that role and be that guy after some point. And it seems like, based on the hype with him, it could come sooner rather than later. So consensus top 5 tight end. I know a lot of people are hoping he breaks Mike Ditka's longstanding rookie touchdown record at the position. I just think I haven't gotten a ton of them on the fantasy teams because, look, we are drafting him by his ceiling. This guy has not played a snap. He's going as a top 5 tight end. He could get there. I'm just not trying to draft guys, at the peak of their powers when we can avoid it.
Yeah, The whole idea of the tight ends, and is that the one that you would say is the steepest drop after the big three? So that's it, right? If you're gonna make a move, Dwain, like tight ends early, you think in fantasy drafts?
Yeah, and I highlighted this. I did 4 articles last week, each around strategy with each position, and then overall putting all that together. And definitely this year, in the first 3 rounds, I would like to have one of those 3. I'm picking from the front end of the first round. I'm going to let Kelsey go personally because usually Waller or Kittle comes back and I can still get one of the top, running backs. If I'm picking in the middle, though, of the first round, I like taking Kelsey right there because coming back, I don't necessarily want to reach quite yet for Waller or Kittle because some of the other options that are on the board. The toughest spot this year, Chris, to draft tight end from is if you're drafting at the end of the round. So if you're picking, between 10, 11, and 12 in a 12-person league, you kind of got to make a decision. Am I going to go ahead and reach for Waller or Kittle, or am I going to get aggressive, to your point, and just try to swing big on a guy like Kyle Pitts, in the 4th round, or maybe TJ Hawkinson is the player that you like? For me personally, when I'm in that position, I just kind of let it all ride. I don't take the tight end there in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th rounds. I wait to see if one of those guys drop back to me in the 5th. And then if not, Logan Thomas kind of becomes my fail-safe option in round 8, a player that never leaves the field, for Washington. He's not going to do what the top guys are going to do, but he doesn't have all the questions that everyone behind him has.
Yeah, the other one, I'll stick with the Falcons for just a minute. Calvin Ridley, a lot of people quit following the Falcons last year at a certain point when they were sort of out of it. But Julio Jones missed about half the year a season ago, and Calvin Ridley stepped up and played like a number 1 wide receiver. He is number 4, Dwain, on your list, just below Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, I love Ridley. I think he's the next guy. You always want to be thinking about, which of these guys that we're taking all through your draft are going to be worth 2-3 rounds earlier next year. And I think Ridley's the guy that next year when we're drafting, he'll be a 1st-round pick. He's going to be the lead target on his team. Pitts will probably be, number 2 there. But he's shown that he can handle it. He's done well. Now, Matt Ryan has struggled when Julio Jones has been out. But as far as Calvin Ridley goes, he's been great. And I really love what they've done. You bring in Arthur Smith. I expect a lot more play action. I expect more efficiency out of Calvin Ridley. He can run all of those routes that they want to use, just like what you saw with A.J. Brown. He's not quite, I don't want to get Ian stirred up here. He's not quite the run after the catch monster as what we've seen with A.J. Brown. But I think Ridley, honestly, as a route runner, is more refined. He can do more. So I'm super excited. I think the Falcons want to be more of a pass to run balance team, not pass heavy like they were in the past. But I think that everything funnels through Ridley, and then Pitts will be second.
And I get the hesitation. Like, you move Julio out of the offense, is that going to mean more double teams for Ridley and less production there? But last year, again, in a good sample, Ridley, 20.6 fantasy points per game without Julio, 17.5 fantasy points per game with. Why did he average more fantasy points per game without Julio? Because he got an extra 3.3 targets per game. So even if that efficiency falls off, the increase in volume is all we need in fantasy land.
So let's take an example. Do you pay any attention to defenses in the division? So let's take the AFC North, right? If you want a receiver, but you've got to play 2 games a year against that division. Okay, let's throw out the Bengals for a minute. But you have to go through Baltimore's defense, Pittsburgh's defense, and Cleveland's defense is going to be no joke this year. Do you pay attention to that at all?
As a tiebreaker, I consider it. I would say if you're going to look at strength of schedule, look at it in spurts. Like I mentioned, the Kirk Cousins first 7 games. I'm willing to look at the first month or 2 of the season, but I don't want to make decisions based on a guy's schedule in December, because who knows? Maybe those Pittsburgh and Ravens games, if TJ Watt gets hurt and then Marlon Humphrey's out, all of a sudden those matchups aren't quite as rough. And one of the things you brought up earlier, getting 170 yards in a blowout loss or whatever, things like that happen too. So defense certainly matters in fantasy, but sometimes our ability to really properly weigh how much it should matter in a start-sit decision is overblown. I always say, start your studs. Start your studs. If you have A.J. Brown, that dude is starting every single week. You're not starting Cole Beasley over him because of his matchup being slightly better. So it's a good tiebreaker, not something to necessarily hang your hat on every single round.
Dwain, give me the strategy for running backs. I think if there's anything that's frustrating for the average fan who watches football or they pay attention to PFF, we preach running backs don't matter, that it's more about the offensive line. But in fantasy football, running backs are everything, or at least they used to be. I think wide receivers are making a little comeback now as far as the significance, but it really is all about the running back, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't get points for receptions, it's still 100% running back, right? But when you get into where you get a half a point per reception and you get a full point per reception, which is where a lot of the fantasy leagues are today, because people want more points, just like they want in the NBA. They want more points, more points. That's where the NFL is heading to. So the running backs, yeah, they are the key. So this year, I want to walk away with 1 running back in the first 2 rounds. So, and if you want a strategy for that, we call that anchor running back. You want at least 1. And then you're leaving yourself some flexibility. You don't necessarily want to be attacking running backs, in my opinion, from rounds 4 through, say, 6 or 7. I think there's a lot of risk with those players. There's a couple of profiles there that I like. But overall, the receivers that you're taking in that range, I feel much more confident about them being able to remain healthy for a season. And it just gives you the opportunity to take some of the backs that I do like later. So in the first 2 rounds, Chris, I mean, just to kind of name it off, you want 1 of McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Kamara, Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry, Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, Nick Chubb, Antonio Gibson, or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You want 1 of those backs in the first 2 rounds. The guy that I'm targeting the most often this season in the second round is Joe Mixon. With Gio Bernard gone, I think he's got the opportunity to truly be an every down back. Our own Andrew Erickson was interviewing a Cincinnati beat reporter last weekend on SiriusXM, and everything sounds like it is all systems go for Joe Mixon. He's going to handle pretty much all of the work. And this is a player that everybody was really excited about just over the last 2 years. I remember last year people drafting Joe Mixon at the end of the first round, and I'm like, look, love the player, but he's going to be off the field in the passing down work, and so he wasn't worth it. But this year it's the opposite, and you can get him in the middle of the second to the end of the second. So you have a chance to start off with like a Kelsey and a Mixon. That's a great start from the middle position. If you're in an early position and you get to start off with, say, a Dalvin Cook and then come back with a Mixon, at that point, you have two backs and you've got complete flexibility and you don't have to worry about it. Basically, at that point, you're just looking for value to fall to you at the running back position. As you get a little later, you get past round 6 or so, some names for folks just to keep in mind. I'm really big this year on Trey Sermon. Ian, you can jump in here. I know you're the Mostert guy. We actually like both players, but I see Sermon as being a really good fit in Kyle Shanahan's scheme. If you take a guy like Javonte Williams, who has upside as a rookie, that's great. Just remember, if he's your second running back, you should probably want to add another back. You may not be wanting to start him early in the season. That could still be the Melvin Gordon show, especially in the passing down situation. So once you get past those early guys, I think there's plenty of upside that you can look at, especially if you load up on the receivers and say you've got a tight end and an elite back. It just gives you some flexibility. And then if you're not in a best ball, you can really work the waiver wire because we know injuries occur most often at the running back position. So that gives you additional flexibility down the stretch.
Give us some strategy, Ian. I mean, at what point, tell us what you're thinking at the top end, but when does quarterback start to enter your mind?
I would say round 4 or 5. One of Mahomes or Lamar is still there at that point. Then I'm okay going for it.
And explain why that is. Because generally when you play fantasy football, the guy who ends up with the most points is the quarterback. But I assume there's a certain balance to that.
I mean, last year alone, there was I think 20 quarterbacks that averaged at least 17.5 fantasy points per game. That's a very solid number. So if you're just in a one quarterback league, there's 20 plus viable quarterbacks. Now, there's not 20 plus real life quarterbacks, but even before Josh Allen took that huge step last year to become the MVP runner up that he was always a great fantasy quarterback. So again, this goes back to the idea, don't necessarily need to be great in real life to be great in fantasy. And I'm with Dwain. We want to chase all that volume at the beginning. In the past, we could worry more about offensive lines and things like that with these running backs. Now we just want the volume because every backfield these days is pretty much a committee. In the year 2000, there were 19 running backs with at least 300 touches. Last year, there were 4. So Najee Harris, Joe Mixon. I get it. I don't love targeting guys behind those offensive lines either, but when they're going to catch passes, we get that extra boost, and that's when we're down for it. So I think Dwain is making a lot of sense. In the first 3 rounds, you want to get a stud running back, hopefully one of Kelsey, Waller, Kittle, and then just start taking receivers because as the list goes on, we can get guys like Sermon, Raheem Mostert, Damian Harris, Zach Moss, James Robinson now that Travis Etienne's hurt. And I'm not saying those guys are sure things, but we have similar questions to those guys as we do with the Darrell Hendersons, the Miles Sanders, guys that are going in the same range as just some awesome wide receivers we have less questions about. So Dwain said, we got all these fantasy draft strategies. I agree. Anchor RB, go get your stud early, and then just load up on the receivers, and you can figure out the rest later.
Yeah, Trey Sermon, San Francisco, of course, you're basically picking Kyle Shanahan at that point, right?
And people have gotten burned by him the last 3 years because these running back for a while we had Devontae Freeman, Alfred Morris, even Carlos Hyde for a year, put up big numbers. He's been using the committees, so then now the running backs are actually a lot cheaper than they were in the past.
Beautiful. So if you guys, give me the over-under on a couple of quarterbacks, okay? So what round, if they fell to round what, would you take Patrick Mahomes?
I'd say over-under would be 4.5, where I'm taking him at that point.
Yep, same for me.
Dak Prescott.
For me right now, that's round 7.
I was going to say 6.5.
I'm willing to pull the trigger in 6, but you can get him in 7 right now. He's sliding probably 1 out of every 3 drafts I do. He's sliding into that range.
If I already had Cooper or CeeDee Lamb on the squad, I'd feel better about that because we're going first or last. So if you're going to go in on one of these top receivers, then you can stack them with the QB.
Matthew Stafford, now with the Rams.
They might have to throw the ball with all these running back injuries even more than they wanted to. I'd say Stafford's someone that's more 11.5. It's the Aaron Rodgers problem. He can be amazing, but as long as he doesn't run, it's going to be hard for him to be amazing in fantasy.
Yeah, round 12 is where I've got Stafford.
Wow. Tom Brady. So I'm throwing out all the big name guys. So if you knew nothing about fantasy football, you'd go, oh my God, first round, I'm taking Tom Brady. But no, don't do that, right?
I'd say 9.5. Just these statue quarterbacks. And his arm looks as good as ever. Everyone's back. I get it. Still.
just because of the lack of running.
Last year,
Yeah.
he was about the QB 11 fantasy points per game. So,
Yeah, I have actually just a question for you, Chris. Get your thoughts on this one. So when you look at a guy like Brady, he was in his first year, in the system. You've played in the league. If you look at the last 8 games, so number one, in the first 8 games, you had Mike Evans hurt right out of the gate. People forget that he injured his hamstring. He was doubtful for week 1. He played through it. Finally started getting healthy. Then he hurt his ankle. Chris Godwin missed 4 of the first 8 games. You had Antonio Brown suspended for the first 8 games. So if you look at Brady over the last 8 games of the season, he averaged 306 yards a game, 8.1 yards per attempt. That's a full yard over the first 8 games. The other thing is they threw the ball more in every scenario. So in close games, they were up 2%. In games where they were leading, they were up 3% as far as passing versus rushing. And then over the last 8 games, they threw the ball 5% more when they were trailing. So it seemed to me that they really were starting to say, look, we kind of tried this running thing, but we've got all these receivers. We've got Brady. And so for me, Brady is a key component of the strategy. I have 3 quarterbacks identified as centerpieces for the strategy of how you should approach quarterback in 2021. And Tom Brady is one of them. So I would just like your thoughts, Chris, when you think about a quarterback getting acclimated, new offense, coordinator getting to understand him. Bruce Arians and him seem to be simpatico. You got the receivers healthy. What are your thoughts on Tom Brady?
I think that as big a favorite as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are this year, and I know the Chiefs are the number 1 favorite, I think Tampa Bay is the overwhelming favorite in my mind in the league this year for a lot of the reasons you just talked about. But Tom Brady switching teams, basically not being able to go through a normal offseason and a camp. They were at one point, I want to say 7-5, but I just had watched the tape against them and the Green Bay Packers, and they were down 10-0 and ended up winning the game 38-10, whatever it was. And it wasn't the offense that turned me on. It was watching that defense play. And now that defense is simply going to be better. And with Bruce Arians having flipped the script, I think, a little bit in Tom Brady's mind. Yeah, sure, we were around in 2007 and Randy Moss and 23 touchdowns and all of that. But you could tell at the end of last year that they weren't afraid of making a mistake on offense. So that's just going to lend itself to even more bombs away. A, if they intercept the deep ball, big deal. But B, you've got some of the best deep ball receivers and Tom Brady throwing the ball. But you also have a defense that can cover your ass, right? And I don't know that I can name a whole lot of combinations like that. I mean, you go down, Levante David, Devin White playing the linebacker position. Vita Vea back at the nose tackle position looked good. They've got a secondary that was the question mark going into the season last year. The question was, could this baby young secondary hold up? And they did, and they got better, and they're going to be even better. Antoine Winfield's going to be even better than what he was a season ago. Their offensive lines is good across the board, just about, and they're not as good as, but there's a chance that O.J. Howard, Cameron Brate, Rob Gronkowski can all play, and those receivers are as good as anybody.
So deep.
And Giovanni Bernard is going to give him the James White that he didn't have a season ago. So pick a hole in that. I'm sitting there going, where's the flaw on that football team?
I did an article series where because we can talk up almost anyone, and that is going as a top 12 fantasy player. And for Brady, I was just like, Father Time comes. That's the only way it could go south for him because they have everyone back. You mentioned the turnovers and how he was more willing to go deep. That was the biggest surprise for me last year because one of the really cool stats we had from PFF going to last season was we only had 3 quarterbacks have at least 40 turnover-worthy plays in a single year. Carson Palmer, Jameis Winston, Andrew Luck, all of them in their first year with Bruce Arians. What does Tom Brady do? Leads the league in lowest turnover-worthy play rate. So the guy, obviously GOAT, special. I don't know when it's going to stop. I'm not going to bet against him.
And was one of the top deep ball throwers.
Second in average target depth, yep.
Yeah, so I mean, the whole thing to me just, they're going to have to lose it in my mind for them. Somebody may come out of the woodwork, we may say, San Francisco is always my pick to win the NFC. And of course, the last few years have just been train wrecks with the injuries and the whole thing. But yeah, I'm really big on Tampa. I think Tampa and Tom Brady, and, don't forget, he had knee surgery at the end of the season. But when they were 7-5, whatever, I came out and they asked me to do, PFF guys asked me to do a top ranking. And I put Tampa as number one. And then the next week we had them against the Saints and they got beat 38-3. I said, don't ever ask my ass to do a top 5 again, ever again, because I don't know what I'm talking about. And then they went on the run. They just went on the run after that.
It was a special year for him. And yeah, it's not sexy to pick a repeat of the Super Bowl contenders, but just looking at it objectively across the league, I don't know how you can come up rationally with anyone else.
It's tough when you're talking about favorites. All right, one final parting shot here, guys. What's one secret weapon, one secret strategy, something for our glorious listeners who are getting ready to go into their fantasy draft?
I would just say in general, draft players closer to their floor than ceiling when you can. And this has gotten me to guys like Tyler Boyd, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, because when you look at the numbers they're projected for versus where they're going in the drafts, it doesn't add up. You can be high on Jamar Chase, you can be high on T. Higgins, but to say that they're 15 wide receiver spots better than Tyler Boyd, who before Burrow got hurt last year was the wide receiver 11 in all of fantasy, just doesn't add up to me. So I would say, we talked about Brandon Cooks, Corey Davis. Like when you're in these middle rounds going for wide receivers, follow the targets, follow the opportunity. And when you happen to catch, again, a legit contender for triple-digit targets in these middle rounds, that's a great example of someone that probably would be going a little bit higher if people were sticking more to the opportunity like they should.
And you guys have projected targets and all that sort of stuff so they can file in. What do you say there, Dwain?
Yeah, so for me, if you use the strategy we talked about, where you're taking a running back early and then you're waiting a little bit, you're picking up a Sermon, maybe even then you pick up somebody that catches some passes. I'm typically rostering 2 of the 4 players I'm about to name to you, and it's Tony Pollard, Alexander Mattison, Darrington Evans, and Chuba Hubbard. So those guys all play behind, elite, backs. For Pollard and for Evans, they both play behind backs that are hitting this season. They're going to hit 1,500 rushing attempts, which we know is about when the running backs start to either level off or start to falter, right? And most running backs don't make it to that stage. But I think you're getting players that could totally change the trajectory of your season. Now, I'm bigger on these players in a redraft format than in a best ball. Because in a redraft format, if it's not working out and I need to make a move, I can. But those are players that if the back in front of them goes down, you're immediately going to have a great starting running back too that's going to give you an advantage over pretty much everybody in your league.
Well, good luck to you guys in your fantasy drafts this year. Seriously, just as a brief estimate, how many fantasy drafts have you guys done already? And we're just really hitting the beginning of fantasy draft season.
I'm afraid to hear Dwayne's answer. Best ball, I'm probably in 40 to 50, and I have like 15 lineups I'll need to edit during the year. Dwayne, what number are you at this year? Last year was absurd.
No, I'm a little over 40 in best ball,
okay.
But I love redraft more. And so I like to play anywhere from 12 to 20 teams.
I thought you had like 70 last year.
Well, that was with best ball as well.
Okay.
Now I've done that many before, but that's insane, man. It's just too much. It's too much to handle all of the. It's like Chris said he didn't want to handle one team where he's got to worry about setting his lineup and picking players up. Try doing that for 70. Your wife does not like you at the end of that season. So even if you win.
Guys, it was fun. Thanks. Good luck. We appreciate you. Everybody, if you're thinking about fantasy football, and it's that time of year right now, Dwain McFarland, Ian Hartitz here at PFF, they have fabulous articles. Even if you don't want to pay for all the in-depth detail, just come to the site, read the articles. You're going to learn plenty about it, and it's great having you guys on our team.
Appreciate you, man. It sure makes watching Red Zone a little bit more fun.
It does.
All right, thanks so much for tuning in today. That was a lot of fun. Enjoyed having all my guys hanging out with us. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. If you give it a 5-star review, then I can keep paying those hardworking young men top dollar to keep them working for you in fantasy football, which is always a great thing. Don't forget the Worst Ball Fantasy. You can head over to PFF and get a description of all those playing rules and some of the rosters from which you can choose. But that was a lot of fun as well. So until next week, and Worst Ball is an institution all over the country. We'll see you right here on the Cris Collinsworth podcast.